All right, everybody, it's time to get this show on the road. I am recording, so we will be able to rebroadcast this. If for some reason you have to step out, we will be sending you an email with a complete recap, and we'll also be posting it to our website, The One Thing, afterwards. So about 3 times as many people who was on the call usually go back and listen to it later. So really quickly, today we're going to be talking with John Howard, a friend here from Austin who runs the site Ready, Set, Love, and we're going to be talking about the one thing for relationships. What we've heard from your feedback is that about 30% of the folks on this call have not read the one thing, are not familiar with the one thing. So one of the first things I like to do is kind of give people a recap of how this whole webinar series started. So I'm going to quickly try to recap the big idea in the book. I'll introduce John, and then we'll be off to the races. And one final reminder, because about 150 people have logged in since the last time I mentioned it, anytime throughout this broadcast, you can leave a question for us using the questions toolbar, and we will try to get to that at the end of the show. We'll save about 15 minutes to answer your specific questions. So quickly about the one thing. If you had to boil it down, it's really about Pareto's law. Hopefully you've heard of the 80-20 rule, the 80-20 principle. It comes from an Italian economist, Vilfredo Pareto, and he observed that 80% of the land in Italy was held by 20% of the people. And later a guy named Joseph Duran, a quality control expert, kind of heard about this and said, holy cow, that's actually a lot bigger than just about wealth in Italy. This is kind of a law. And we now know there's tons of books written on the subject. It's kind of a law, it's kind of like gravity. It's something that's very real, but it's a success law. That if you focus on the minority of things that get you the most results, you'll get ahead. And the one thing is really a system. It's an approach that gets you to your 20%, really the 20% of your 20%, so you get the maximum results from the efforts that you get there. What we hope that you'll get in return is called a domino run. And that's kind of the metaphor that we use. So you might hear John and I talking about what's your first domino? How do those dominoes line up? Because it's all about the sequence that you do your priorities. And if you do them in the right order, you can enjoy what we hope is a geometric domino run. We did find some research, one that said that if you do one thing, a lot of stuff can happen. Almost 4.9 million dominoes got lined up in Norway and all knocked over because they were properly aligned. And what's kind of even cooler, there was an article in the American Journal of Physics that said that a 2-inch domino can knock over a 3-inch domino, and a 3-inch domino can knock over a 4.5-inch domino. Essentially, not only can one thing do many things, it can do more and more. It actually builds up power as it goes. And in the book, if you remember this page, it's probably my kids' favorite page in the book because they just kind of got it. If you follow that progression, a geometric progression, from a 2-inch domino to the 18th, it would knock over a domino as big as the Leaning Tower. By the 23rd, you'd be to the Eiffel Tower. And what kind of blows your mind, just 31 dominoes into it, that little 2-inch domino would have built up so much progressive momentum, it could knock over a domino 3,000 feet taller than Everest. By the 57th, it would almost be all the way from the Earth to the moon. It's what's called a geometric progression. And what I love about this graphic that's on your screen is the shape of it. We call that the hockey stick graph. And anything that grows in a progressive manner, right, like compound interest, over time it looks like not much is happening until a whole bunch happens at the end. And so many things in life, a lot of success in life, are about progressively doing the right thing, building up momentum, and then something really great happens on the other side. So hopefully today, at the end of this interview, you'll have identified at least one thing that you could make into a habit, something that you could progressively do that would start this domino run in your life. And we'll try to make it our mission to make sure that you get that information. The reason I go to habit is that this is kind of the great secret of success, folks. If you study the people who are the most successful at whatever they do, they are picking their most important thing, their one thing, and they just turn it into a habit. And if you remember from the book, a lot of people confuse this with discipline. We went into the research and we discovered that on average, if you try to implement a new habit, it'll take 66 days to form it. That after about 66 days of repetition, it gets about as easy as it's going to get. And so our mantra is when you know your one thing, make it a habit. So you'll work to get the habit. It takes 66 days, a lot longer than most people will tell you. A lot of people say 21 days, 30 days. It's 66 or more. You'll work for the habit, but then the habit will work for you. Whatever it was that makes you most successful is something that you'll automatically do. And it's a big takeaway. And when you look at really successful people, you'll look at their lives and there's a lot of ritual. It doesn't mean they're robotic, but they have their rituals for their mornings, for their days, and in this case, their rituals for successful relationships. And we'll be looking at that. So in the book, we talked about, this is page 114. It's probably the page I've referenced more than any other, but it's all the areas of your life, the big areas where you might apply the focusing question. And that's really at the heart of the book. It's how you identify your one thing when it's there. What's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything will be easier and necessary. So today we're going to ask that question to try to identify our most leveraged activity, the 20% of the 20% of the 20% for relationships, so that we can all, and as busy as we are, a lot of you on this call are entrepreneurs and business people, how we can get the most out of our personal relationships, because we all know that that's absolutely foundational for everything that comes after it. We're really privileged today that we get to have John Howard on our show. Let me just tell you really quickly a little bit about John. He's a relationship therapist and educator with over a decade of experience helping couples get the most out of their lives together. He's taught public and professional audiences across the United States and has authored numerous articles on awesome relationships. I love that. Not average relationships, awesome relationships. John is the founder of Ready, Set, Love, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about that today. It's an online program that helps couples strengthen their relationships. John draws from neuroscience, attachment theory, and research on the nervous system to offer practical tips on improving connection, communication, and intimacy. So we'll talk about this throughout the show. His handle is Ready, Set, Love right there on the screen, and his site is readysetlove.com if you want more information. But John, welcome to the One Thing webinar. I'm really happy that you're here to share your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much, Jay. It's really an honor to be here with you. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited that you're on the call with me. Relationships are perhaps the single most important aspect of our lives. I talk to many people at different stages of life, and I'm particularly struck when I talk to retirees, people that have lived a long, productive life, and very often they say to me, more and more I'm realizing that the most important part of my life is where my significant relationships are and where they happen, whether that's with my partner, with my kids, what have you. So this is a topic that touches all of us very deeply. It's very impactful. And I'm so excited to be able to share with all of you these important tips for how to have a stronger, more connected relationship.
That's awesome. I mean, you've made this your life work. You've studied it. You've helped a lot of people locally. I heard about you locally, and that's one of the ways that we connected. So it's funny is when we were talking before the webinar, preparing for it, Gary Keller and I went on stage in front of about 12,000 people, and we'd done our research, and we told everybody that the one thing for having great relationships is communication. And I'm sure that's not completely wrong, but it's not exactly right either.
Well, yeah, it's not completely wrong. I mean, communication is a very, very important part of a relationship. But the research has moved on a little bit. Communication theory used to be a really big deal when it came to strengthening relationships. But here's what we've discovered since communication theory was such a big deal, and many therapists were teaching it and using it and so on, is we've learned that if partners learn how to communicate well, they can do that most of the time if they're relatively calm and thinking.
Okay.
But they can't do that when they get upset and the primitive brain takes over, right? One of the things we know about the brain is when we get stressed, anxious, and upset, the first part of our brain to go offline are the frontal lobes, the thinking, executive functioning part of the brain. And so along with all of that going out the window is the fancy communication tools that we've learned. And we all resort to more primitive, name calling and sort of silly comments and behavior that we all regret. So the idea now is that there has to be something more fundamental that we're good at in order to keep ourselves connected in relationship.
It's cool. And I mentioned it. I kind of learned this, but I didn't learn how important it was when we were parenting our daughter, Veronica. And we weren't succeeding at a super high level. So we went to a counselor to get some coaching on how we could do it better. And she walked us through this. And she described it as you got your human brain, which is the frontal lobes. You've got your monkey brain, right, which is a lot of the reaction. And then she called it the reptile brain. And that's like fight or flight. And she's saying, like, when you have a 3-year-old that's having a tantrum, they are nowhere close to their human brain. They're back in their reptile brain. And my wife would laugh at me because you're trying to reason with her and she's not even human right now. And I just, like, it gave me a really good sense. Like, so when we're really, really stressed out, maybe when you need communication most, it's not going to be there available to us.
Exactly. And, think about this, because we know this from other areas of life. If you want to be a great musician, if you want to be a great athlete, you can't sit there and think about your training and what you've learned and then apply it, that consciously, right? You have to develop muscle memory. You have to develop instinctual action. You have to practice things over and over and over again. And this is always what I tell the couples I work with, is it's not so much about, what you can think about that your coach said or the book said or something like that. It's what can you practice over and over again, like a musician, like an athlete, that develops better muscle memory, better instinctive behavior, so that in the hard times, let's say when you and your partner are both stressed and upset, you act in a way that's conducive to connection.
Cool. And I love that idea of practicing. It goes back to the dominoes. It's something simple you can do over a long period of time that gets you a big impact. Mm-hmm. So maybe we should just go to our talking points. Like, one of the things that John identified before the call is he helped us come up with a list, 4 really proven strategies for building connection. And, like I said, the first one wasn't necessarily communication, it's touch. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, let's talk about touch, but I just want to spend 1 minute before I go into this introducing myself a little bit to you, because I think what I've found in talking about relationships is that we all struggle with them, and we also all celebrate aspects of our relationships. And it's such a personal topic that I want to tell you just a little bit about why this is important to me. So I grew up in New York City. I'm the son of a Cuban immigrant, and I grew up speaking Spanish. I also went to kindergarten a year early at 4 years old. So I was smaller than everybody else. I didn't speak the language. I was more socially awkward, and I really struggled to make friends. Add to that the fact that I actually didn't live with my parents, and my grandmother, my Cuban grandmother who raised me, passed away when I was relatively young. For all those reasons, I really, really struggled in relationship. I struggled to connect with other people. I struggled to not feel alone and isolated in the world. This was a very painful part of my life. And I literally remember sitting in elementary school thinking to myself, why are we learning all of these formulas and equations and geometric calculations a few people will use? And we're not talking about the most important things in life that impact everybody. And I would literally go home and tell anybody who would listen, I can't believe we're not talking about how to love and care for one another. This was back in elementary school for me. That's a
Wow.
true story. So when I finally had the chance to do something about that, to sort of fill the educational gap when it comes to how to have an awesome relationship, I leapt at the chance. Because here's a fact that we all know, because we all went through school and we all grew up in families. Who listening right now had a class as a part of your school training or college education, what have you, on how to have a great relationship? Probably no one. And that's because we're failing as a society to provide critical education that shapes how our lives go. We know from research now that the quality of our relationships impacts our immune system, impacts our overall well-being, impacts our lifespan. Almost every important category of life is dramatically shaped by the quality of our relationships. So I just want to let you know a little bit why this is so important to me, why I'm so passionate about it. I had to learn from scratch how to have a healthy, connected relationship. And that's why I love helping other people to do the same.
I love that. So this has been your calling since you were a kid.
Yes.
When did you know that you were going to become a psychologist, a counselor? Like, when did that become the thing that you knew that you would do?
I got into healing work of various types when I was 18. I started studying, indigenous healing traditions. I figured, well, if the people I was around didn't know much about this stuff, maybe natives know more about it. I went looking for truth everywhere in the world that I could find it. And that eventually led to a career in counseling and psychology. But the reason that this has been so important is because I know the struggle personally, and I see how many people struggle in relationships to not feel isolated and alone. So any impact we can make there makes a huge difference.
That's cool. And I don't know that there's anything that's more painful for people than that feeling of social isolation.
Yep.
Because we are fundamentally social creatures.
Yep. So let's talk about touch.
You know what? I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
I'll say, you said, has anybody had a class? And I didn't want to interrupt because I was learning about your childhood. That was good. I actually did have a class.
Wow.
I don't know if it counts, but in high school, we had PAFL, Parenting and Family Living. And as close as we got to relationships is that we had to pair with someone of the other sex, and we had to keep an egg from being broken for a week. So I don't know if that qualifies, but I was cracking up. I was like, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but that was their good-hearted, good-intentioned effort, but maybe not where we're going today to give us a little guidance.
Yeah, caring for the egg is probably good. Maybe not sophisticated enough to handle our relationships, but it's good.
You got an F if it broke, too, so it was serious stuff. All right, so let's go back to touch. So this is about neurology. This is like deep stuff. So tell us why we're going right to the senses here.
Okay, because the one thing that matters the most when it comes to our relationships is, bar none, connection. Connection is the foundation that drives everything else in relationship. It drives intimacy. It drives physical and romantic closeness. It drives communication. It drives bonding. And one of the interesting things that we're learning now from the new science of relationship is what happens in the brain around connection. In other words, what is connection? And how does the brain process connection? And here's a startling statistic. Over 90% of the messages and signals that we send back and forth to each other when we interact are out of our conscious awareness. Okay, we are only aware of 10% of the communication that's actually moving between two people when we interact. Well, where is the 90% going? The 90% is going to parts of the right hemisphere of the brain, parts of the lower parts of the brain, the brainstem, and the lower nervous system. Okay, so essentially, it's the subconscious and unconscious areas of ourselves that are receiving that 90%.
Stuff like body language and all of that. Like, it's reading a lot.
It's reading a lot. It's reading, subtle shifts in the eyes. It's reading tone of voice. We're going to be talking about some of these things. But basically, you can learn how to have a much stronger connection with your partner if you understand where your 90% is going. And are you being smart about how you're communicating to those subconscious and unconscious areas? So one of the things we know about the nervous system, and I like to call this the language of the nervous system because it has a different language, is that it responds to certain things, but not so much to words, right? It listens, if you will, similar to the way our dogs listen. Okay, I'm sure many of you listening have pets, you have dogs, and you know that you can say something to your dog that maybe isn't the nicest thing to say to your dog, but you say it in a fun, loving, playful tone of voice, and your dog just loves it, right, and responds, as if you were praising.
You are the worst little dog in the world. And it's like tail is wagging.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all over you. Okay. So our nervous systems listen a lot the way our dogs listen. Okay. It's listening to touch. It's listening to body language. It's listening to tone of voice. So touch is one of those primary ways of speaking to the unconscious and subconscious parts of the brain. Now, how can you use touch in a practical way? Well, let's say you're having a conversation with your partner, you're having a typical interaction. Many of us do that primarily through words. Okay, we stand at a distance of about between 2 and 4 feet, and we use a lot of words. We use long sentences to communicate what's important to us and what we're talking about. And very often that actually registers as a disconnect because the nervous system gets stressed when it has to listen to a lot of words and long sentences. It has to process too much. It actually gets stressed. If you add touch to your interactions, it really changes the game. Just placing your hand on your partner's arm while you're speaking, rubbing their shoulders, gently and lovingly touching their face as you say something to your partner. All of these change the communication. It goes in directly into these lower parts of the brain and nervous system. And what it communicates is we're connected, we're together, we're one. And it almost doesn't matter what my words are at that point. You're listening more to the fact that I'm touching you in a loving manner.
All right, that's cool. So when I come home, like one of my rituals was to always make sure that I try to transition from work to home fast. And it really was the good old fashioned, honey, how was your day? So how would I make that better? Do I just go up and touch her on the arm and say, honey, how was your day? Like, how could I maximize that transition to be back home?
Well, I like that you use the word transition because, yes, these moments when we see each other after being apart for a while are very key moments of our day. And what you do during those transition moments actually counts for more. I like to say that you get 10x the points, on what you do during transition times. Now, one of my...
Really quick, so
Yeah.
before we go that, what are the transition times? Like going to work, coming home from work, going to sleep, waking up? Is that just kind of exactly what you think they might be, or is there something else to it?
No, exactly. Those are it. So if we come home after a trip, let's say, right, one person is traveled and one person hasn't. Certainly waking up in the morning because you've been unconscious for, between 5 and 10 hours. Certainly going to sleep is a transition point. Coming home from work, even if you've been in separate rooms of the house, and you've been doing very separate activities, when you come back together into a common space, that's also a transition.
Okay.
So these moments count for a lot in terms of connection. And one of my primary mentors is someone by the name of Dr. Stan Tatkin. Stan is one of the world's foremost authorities on applying neuroscience to relationships to help make them stronger. And he's written a fabulous book called Wired for Love, which I encourage everyone to read together as partners. There's also an audio version of the same book called Your Brain on Love, which is fabulous if you like to listen to audiobooks. But one of the things that Stan came up with is something he calls the welcome home exercise.
Okay.
Now, the welcome home exercise is, to answer your question, the way that we can maximize that coming home transition. Because what we've learned from the research around touch and connection and so on is you want to get the nervous system involved in connection because that's where 90% of the decision is being made as to whether I feel safe and secure with you. Mm-hmm. What Stan is teaching with his welcome home exercise is he's encouraging couples to hug when they meet each other after being apart for a while. Not just any ordinary hug, but a belly-to-belly hug that you hold for a while. Okay. Now, some of you might be chuckling because we all have different timing when it comes to hug. And some of us, have a 2-second timer when it comes to hugs, and some of us have a 30-second timer. And it's helpful to know, how your timing varies with your partner's timing. But for this purpose of connecting yourselves through a hug, you really do have to hold it. And what you're waiting for is you're waiting for a sigh, or you're waiting for the muscles to relax. You're essentially waiting for both you and your partner to relax into each other. When that happens, the neurons in your gut that are responsible for a lot of that fight or flight reaction, safety and security decisions, they actually sync up with each other. Okay, this is really interesting. It's exactly...
They literally sync up.
They like literally sync up, okay. Yes. It's like syncing your, smartphone or, whatever. The neurons in your nervous system sync up. And once that happens, there's usually a sigh or there's a physical relaxation. And what that has communicated at that point, without any words at all, is we are safe together, we are secure together, we are friendly to one another, and you haven't said a thing. That's a very powerful way to come home.
I love that. So a bro hug is probably not going to do it.
Probably
right? Not. It's not enough. But immediately you're
no
saying
fist bumps.
That no fist bumps. Like, it's serious. This is like, just hold it. Okay, now we're there. I actually practiced this on my son. I think did I share this with you?
I don't think so. No.
After our first call, I went home. I practiced it with my son. My son would run out, and he usually wanted to tell me what happened on the Xbox that day or whatever. It's still summertime for him. He starts Monday. And I just said, come here and give me a hug. And I held it. And he really wanted to talk about the Xbox.
Right.
And I held it. And I remember him physically just unclenching for a second. And when we got apart, I got a little teary. He got he had tears in his eyes.
Oh my gosh.
There was this really nice little emotion. So
people aren't used to connecting this deeply.
Yeah.
And so at first it's a little awkward and it takes developing a new habit, but it is incredibly powerful. And aside from the physiological syncing up and the connection that creates, here's another reason it's powerful. It makes a huge statement about the importance of your partner in your life. There's so many things we can do when we come home, right? We can say hello to the dog. We can go put our things down. We can go straight to the kitchen and start making a snack. Making a beeline to your partner, looking them directly in the eyes, hugging them as the very first thing you do, says, I came home for you. And that really makes a statement.
Cool. So one of the things I immediately started thinking of, Mo Anderson, some of you on this call are in our organization and know Mo's style. I remember I moved to New York, joined KW, and one of my first staff meetings, she said at the end of the meeting, now everybody has to give 7 hugs before they leave the room. And it was very literal. And I was very kind of shocked and uncomfortable with it. Maybe at some points while we're doing this, is there something we can take from this and also apply in our, not necessarily with our partner, like our family relationships? Does this apply also in work?
Absolutely, it does. And
maybe not a long, uncomfortable hug, or right. Is that okay? I don't know.
Right, maybe not the kiss, and yeah, no, absolutely. The new science applies to business relationships and friendships and any type of relationship. And you mentioned the one with your son, and that's a powerful example. But yes, and you might not use the hug. But if we skip ahead a little bit to one of the other keys, based on the new science of connection, which is eye contact, which is if you deliver a message to someone and you're not looking at them, it doesn't register nearly as deeply. But when you take the time to look somebody directly in the eyes and you say what you need to say from your heart directly into their eyes without looking away, that's a message that's going to go in much more deeply. And so that's obviously a strategy that you can use in business to create stronger relationships. It's a strategy you can use in sales to allow people to feel like you're a more trustworthy person. Because remember, you're speaking to the subconscious here. But yeah, I mean, a hug, if you can get away with it, certainly you get that physical bonding.
We do it in our office, and we just warn people. We're huggers around here, and maybe it's Texas. I don't know. We get away with it, and most people are okay with it. We have international people coming in now, and we might be a little slower to move straight to the hug with the language barrier. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. I didn't mean to take you off the topics because these are lined up in order, right? If you only did one thing, you would focus on touch first.
Yes, and the central concept here being connection, because I have to say, from having seen so many couples over the years, couples, if they're struggling, if they're having some negative feelings as well as positive, and that's pretty much every relationship under the sun, we all go scrambling and looking for reasons why our relationship isn't working as well as we'd like it to. And we start focusing on many, many different areas, right? Is it the kids? Is it how much we're working? Is it the fact that we have different ideas about cleanliness? Is it the fact that we can't load the dishwasher the same way? Right? All these different reasons we go looking for. And I just want to reiterate that the central reason why we may be struggling in our relationships is how skilled we are at connection, and that it's not really so much about changing as an individual, which a lot of people are promoting this idea, right? If you change as an individual, you'll have a better relationship. That's actually not necessarily true. A relationship is a third entity, right? It's not a 1 + 1 = 2. And what really makes the most difference is how skilled you are at connecting with one another. So yes,
I like that image. I've never heard that before. There's you, there's me, and the third entity in the room is what we share.
It's what we create together.
Okay.
And it's never existed before. And we can't really predict it based on who you are and who I am. We can only predict it based on how skilled we are at navigating that third thing that we're creating.
Cool.
It's a really beautiful idea. But yes, if you're just going to pick one, touch is a very, very powerful strategy to increase connection.
Well, I'll tell, because after that call, I practice. I'll challenge everybody here. Pick someone you really, really care about, and the next time you see them, make a commitment to give them that hug. And if Ben Kinney is in your life and he's on this call, he knows this is a joke. Go hug him because it'll make him very uncomfortable. 2, let's go to the second domino. So I want to make sure that we have lots of time. I already see some great questions coming up. Proximity. Why does that follow? It's number two. It's
Yes.
the second domino.
Proximity is huge, again, because of what the nervous system is paying attention to. It's a totally different conversation at 6 inches than it is at 3 feet. Okay, the brain processes, the things in our environment differently at different distances. And at a distance of 3 to 4 feet, it's more of a business relationship. It's more of a conversational distance. Okay, we're negotiating decisions and things like that. If you move in and you have the same conversation at 6 inches, what we call the distance of love, right?
6 inches feels really close
It's
to me.
very close.
Okay, I got a little uncomfortable when you said the number.
But understand, we're primarily talking about romantic partnerships
Right.
here, and you can get away with that. The brain processes conversation totally differently at that distance of love.
Especially if you brushed your teeth.
Especially, right, than it does at a distance of 3 to 4 feet. So if
Wow.
you really want to change the game when it comes to connection in your relationship, incorporate touch, but also be very aware of how you're using distance. If you have a conversation with your partner at a distance of 3 to 4 feet, and let's say the kitchen counter is in between you, and the vase with flowers is in between you, and you're talking over all of that, the nervous system is having a very different experience. It has to process way more issues of threat and safety. If you move in and you get nice and close, the brain makes an assumption there rather quickly that you must be friendly, we must be lovers, because otherwise you would not be in this close. And it switches into a different mode of listening.
I think about how many conversations happen among couples, especially in my experience with small children, where like literally one person's in a closet and the other person's in another room. And because you're in the bedroom, it feels like an intimate conversation. You can be talking about the kids or life or your work, but you're not even literally in the same space.
Right.
And it's not the same thing.
No, it gets people in trouble. There's many things that get us in trouble in relationship. Arguing about things in the car, trying to do complicated conversations over text and email, and having conversations when we're in different rooms. Why do all of these things get us in trouble? Because the nervous system can't process the connection very well. It can't read body language. It can't look directly into the eyes. It doesn't have the physical proximity it needs to establish safety and security.
Well, 90% of the conversation is missing.
Pretty much.
Well, tone might still be there. You get tone, and that's the only extra you got.
But the tone may be aggravating because we're yelling because we're in separate rooms.
Right. Even if it's just to raise volume, it's got nothing to do with emotional state.
It's counterproductive. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for going down that little path. So it's touch, it's proximity, closer. I mean, especially when I think about that with my wife, Wendy, I'm okay with 6 inches. When I think about that, that's definitely not a business application.
Not a business. No.
But I mean, I think about when you sat down, we're interviewing in the same room. I remember thinking we want to be at the corner of the table rather all across the table because we're having a conversation. So those proximity things actually do work.
Some do apply. Absolutely.
So let's go to the eye contact. We kind of jumped ahead.
Yeah.
Why is eye contact so important?
Eye contact is important because we all know the saying, the eyes are the windows into the soul, right? Now, regardless of whether you believe in a soul or not, here's one thing we do know about the eyes. The eyes are a live window into the nervous system, okay? If you want to know what's happening in your partner's nervous system, gaze into their eyes, watch the subtlety of movement and change, and you will know what's going on because we all make certain small expressions that are involuntary based on the feelings and emotions we're having. Fear registers in the eyes, anger registers in the eyes, anxiety registers in the eyes. These are all things that we can see if we're paying attention. One of the things I tell the clients I work with is, I know we're all a little uncomfortable with eye contact, but you can train yourself to watch your partner like a movie, okay? Typically, what we tend to do is we take a snapshot of our partner, we take a mental picture of them, and then we speak to that picture. And we're looking away and we're looking at the wall and we're looking at, the garden, and we're continuing to talk, but we're no longer watching our partner in real time like a movie. And if you train yourself to do this, you'll see how the plot changes. You'll see emotions rise and fall. You'll see stress come up. You have to watch the face, particularly the eyes. that puts you in the present moment with your partner, which helps connection. That puts you in real time with them, where you can change what you're saying and your tone of voice based on what you see. And most of us are not paying close enough attention to be able to do that. But the eyes are where it's at. The eyes give you the nuance of information that you need to be able to stay fully present with your partner.
You said it, and I didn't want to interrupt the flow. Why is it we feel uncomfortable looking people in the eyes? What's uncomfortable about that?
I think what's uncomfortable about it is that it's one of the most intimate things that we do with one another. We know when we're in each other's eyes that it's hard to hide. We know that we're able to see and penetrate into each other and know what we're feeling, right? So because it's so intimate, people get uncomfortable with it.
When you describe it that way, it's vulnerable.
It's very vulnerable.
Okay.
And, many of us are raised in a culture that doesn't promote it. And so we're not used to it. Maybe we didn't grow up with it. We're used to having more personal space and being a little more independent. But this is one of the ways that you can really supercharge connection in your relationship, is training yourselves to have more sustained eye contact. Now, that doesn't mean you need to sit and gaze at each other, for a half hour, although you can. I try that in my relationship sometimes. It's pretty interesting. But it means that you're just going to hold eye contact a little bit longer when you're having a conversation, making sure that you're watching and that your messages are going in.
It's fun is sometimes that happens, that eye contact. I don't know if you've ever been at a dinner party and something's happening in the room and you know what's going through your partner's mind and you just make eye contact. There's no words, there's nothing,
right.
And you both just crack up.
Yeah.
Because you both kind of know, and there's that moment. It's a very intimate thing. Like, yes, we both are in sync here, even if we're across the room.
Yep. I used to realize the power of this myself when I started doing healing sessions, with other healers and therapists, just trying to work on myself. But I would say things, and based on the eye contact I was having, we could tell immediately that what I said wasn't true, right? Mm-hmm. Because the eyes spoke a deeper honesty and truth than my words. And we all do that sometimes if we're paying attention. If we have good eye contact, we'll say things to our partner, and then we'll immediately realize, I don't actually believe that, or I don't even feel that's true, because what the connection we have through our eyes is saying something else.
That's cool. All right, so we got about 7 minutes or so. We're going to go through the last one and anything else that just kind of comes up, because this is fun for me. I definitely, my one thing is to be the best husband and father I can be. I'm real clear about that. So this is priceless for me to apply my one thing. Reminder to everybody out there, we've got, almost no one's left. We got almost 500 people. If you've got a question for John, if you'll type it into the questions, we will absolutely try to get to those. At the end of this, we'll have about 15 minutes. So with that said, John, tone. Why is tone so important? How does that work?
Tone of voice is a big deal, again, because of how the nervous system listens, which is a lot similar to the way our dogs listen. So you can say something that's a little bit challenging with a sweet and calm and loving tone of voice, and it'll be accepted. You can say something that's very benign and neutral with a snarky tone of voice, and it'll cause a big problem. And that's because the nervous system is paying more attention to tone than it is to the actual words. Now, certain words will cause a big stir regardless. We call those dangerous words. These are hot button words that we typically try to stay away from. But in the range of normal conversation, tone is the bigger deal. And we all get caught up in our message. We get caught up in making our point. We want to be listened to and understood. And honestly, if you're relying on your words to carry that forward, you're making a mistake, because it's very hard for our partners to listen to us when our tone is off, when the connection is off, and we're trying to be heard through our words. People just get frustrated and annoyed because they can feel the connection just isn't there. So pay attention to your tone of voice. Try to modulate your tone so that it's soothing, it's calm, it's loving, it's conveying a kind of safety and security to your partner. And watch the power of that. Watch what you can get away with in terms of what you say and how honest you can be when you have a nice tone of voice.
You've clearly practiced it. You're a professional. Is this something they teach you even as a counselor? Because, you're usually dealing with emotionally charged situations. mean, this is just a learned skill. Like anybody can do this, right?
Anybody can do this. And, I think we have it last on our list here because it's actually one of the most difficult things to change about ourselves.
Okay.
It's hard for us to be aware of our tone of voice in the moment when we're talking. It's hard to remember to pay attention to it because we've been talking for so many years. It's just natural, right? We just talk. But yes, certainly, this is something therapists think about, their tone of voice and how they're speaking, how it changes emotion in the room, how it creates more connection. And this is something that is a very powerful tool for all of us if we pay attention to it. Just a small shift, like notice right now that my speed is slowing down, right? So if you were agitated and I started speaking more slowly, this would start to bring you down just a little bit, right? Notice that my tone has changed, right? I'm going more up and down with my voice. I don't just have a static voice like this, which is very annoying, right? Some of us get very monotone. So if you have that flexibility and nuance in your voice, it communicates a connection to your partner.
Well, I wanted to hit on that a little bit because I know that a lot of folks that have logged in today are in sales, right? And so that is something that you learn, mirroring and matching, and also being aware of that. And I know that a lot of folks here, there's a huge contingent of folks that are fans of the one thing that are physical trainers. And they're dealing with people who are in a vulnerable state. I mean, not literally like with a barbell about to fall on their chest, but they're dealing with weight issues and they need some encouragement. So I thought that tone's really important. And I think there's probably a greater than average number of people listening that can probably put that to use just by being triggered a little bit to remember to use it when they can.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else? Those are the four big ones. Those are the four dominoes.
There absolutely is something else I want to mention. And this is something, by the way, that we spend an entire month on in my Ready, Set, Love program because of how critically important it is. And that's understanding that relationships have phases. So one of the biggest mistakes I see couples make is that they misunderstand a phase of relationship with fundamental incompatibility, right? People start to think maybe we're not compatible. Maybe we're just like oil and water. Maybe we're never going to be on the same page because we have these differences and so on. And that's very often not the case. If we've gone through all the trouble of choosing a partner and the courting process and making a long-term commitment and so on, we're pretty well vetted at that point, right? And usually what's more often the case is that we're in a certain phase of relationship that's difficult. It's challenging because certain phases are by necessity challenging in order to get to more intimacy with one another. And we all hit certain differences in these phases, and they're not an incompatibility. And if you have the skills, like I was saying before, getting better at relationship is not about individual change and growth. It's really more about developing greater skill in how you navigate relationship issues and differences. And if you understand the phase of relationship that you're in, you understand the challenges that come with that phase, and you develop the skills to move from that phase to the next one, watch how these issues that are such a big deal right now just evaporate.
Is it really complicated? Like, what are the phases? Like phases of the moon, it's full, it's dark. I mean, or is it?
It's really not complicated at all. To reduce it down to its most simple form. There's the courtship, phase, what we call the honeymoon phase, where we can do no wrong with each other. But people are often hiding, their shadow selves and negative parts of their character and so on. So the second phase is usually a lot more challenging because we're negotiating differences that are annoying that we have to live with. But there's a phase beyond that where our differences become real assets, where we start to appreciate the fact that we're different because now it's become a benefit to us rather than a hindrance. And in order to get to that stage, we actually need a fair amount of skill. Otherwise, we're continually annoyed and we don't know how to get past those annoyances to the phase where we love the fact that we're different.
I took a buddy to lunch today and I asked him about this. I said, what does that bring to mind? And he said he'd just read a study that they did a test where they gave two strangers a chance to listen to information and a couple a chance to listen to information. And by far, the couples did a better job of retaining information. And to get to the nuts and bolts of it, like, she knew that he would be really good at remembering football scores, and he knew that she would be really good at remembering, I don't know, stock quotes. Like they knew each other well enough to know what they actually had to focus on to win the game.
Exactly. That is so beautiful to see because that's two people who know their strengths and weaknesses and they're working together really well. They're not saying to the other, hey, you need to get better at X because that's your weakness. They're saying, no, I understand you have a weakness there and you probably always will. And I'm going to shore that up by being a little bit better myself, in that area because you're better at some things I'm not very good at. And that's a very skilled couple.
That's cool. And that's also, they actually was fairly broad results, but I would imagine over time that those weak spots get accentuated in a healthy relationship because you're used to the compensation that naturally is going to happen.
You would think that, but actually the opposite is true, Jay.
Oh.
Is we actually get better at our deficiencies when we're working well together with another person. And that's because of how the brain learns. The brain actually learns relationally. And so if it can do something with another person that the outcome is better, we start to learn from that. There's a feedback system and we get better at it ourselves.
So by this, you mean to say that I will start hearing my wife the first time she asks me to do something, and she'll start picking up her shoes over time. Yes.
Over time.
Okay. So we got about 15 minutes or so here. I saw some great questions on here, and it was way back in touch, and I want to ask that. Go back up here. Let's see if I can find it here.
And while you're looking at that, Jay, just one more thing. Going back to the training idea, because we don't get a class on relationship, which is really unfortunate.
Oh, that's right. You've got a course.
Yeah, I've got a course. But what I want to say here is that the importance of practice, because we all get together as adults in relationship. We have no idea what we're doing a lot of the time. We're expected to do it well and raise kids and be professionals and do all this stuff. And it's really, really hard. I mean, how many other areas of our lives do we expect ourselves to be really good at with no training and practice? So one of the things that I've built into my Ready, Set, Love program are actual exercises that couples can do together at home that exercise their relationship muscles and make them better at relationship. It's not just information which goes out the window. This is real practice. And I think that's one of the things that can make the biggest difference.
I love that you brought that up because my wife and I have already made a commitment to doing that. What I like about it, the idea of us getting a relationship coach and going into an office, I'm an introvert, kind of private. It makes me a little uncomfortable. But the idea of us getting a glass of wine after the kids go to bed and logging on and walking through some exercises together, that feels really comfortable to me. And it feels proactive in how we can maybe make our relationship stronger.
It's private. You get to have that conversation between yourselves of what really matters to you, what you're trying to get better at. It's really, really helpful. Of course, so is counseling, but a lot of people aren't going to go into counseling unless they have a major issue. And this is a way to just improve connection, improve the strength of your relationship, improve intimacy and communication. It's convenient, it's affordable, it's easy. I'm really excited about the program that we're offering.
And I'm absolutely in. So I'm glad you brought it up. I definitely had that on my notes, and my notes are sitting on the other end of the table. So thank you. So Allison asked this question when we were talking about touch. How does the idea of touch help when a couple is in a tiff? Like, does that still work, when you're actually in an active argument? And
the answer is yes, but. So yes, it still works, meaning that yes, the nervous system fundamentally is still going to pay attention to connection through touch. And touch is still something that overall communicates safety and security. But you have to know your person. And some people, when they get upset, are very sensitive to being touched. They may have had a parent that grabbed them a lot when they were upset. They really want physical space, and they want to be able to communicate without being so close to somebody. So the bottom line is what we're talking about are general ideas about connection that tend to work well, but every relationship is unique. And you have to know your person, you have to know yourself, and you have to be able to modulate what we're talking about to that specific relationship. So if you know your partner is sensitive to touch, you might focus a little bit more on your tone of voice until they allow you to move in, and then you can use touch, and it's still going to be powerful.
Okay, that's great advice. I love that. I'm not actually, since some of these, I normally would call out the name, but I'm not going to do that because I feel like some of these might be private.
Sure.
So this person says, my husband does not always make eye contact. He can recite exactly what I've been saying, but this person is missing the connection. She's asking, what's the best way to communicate how important that eye contact is to her?
Well, one of the ways to communicate it is to talk about what the benefits would be, right? I've done a lot of spiritual work in my life, and spirituality is important and meaningful to me. And very often people ask me, how do I talk about spirituality to my partner when they're not into it themselves? And I say, well, the best way to talk about it is to show them the benefits of listening to you and being more interested in that topic. So same is true with eye contact. If you just tell your partner, look, there's a lot of science here, it's pretty good research, if we do a little more eye contact, we'll feel more connected, that might not turn the tide, right? That's information. But if you communicate what a difference it would make to your level of intimacy with each other, right? What a difference it would make to being less stressed, to being less critical, to being less judgmental.
You're removing pain. It's not,
Yes.
and that is something that people are more responsive to making change when it removes pain versus just adding pleasure, to
Exactly.
be simplistic.
So her husband might be concerned, that this is going to be annoying and it's going to be some kind of super emotional, intimate thing that he might not be interested in. She needs to know what he wants out of the relationship. Let's say he wants more ease. Let's say he wants less stress, right? Okay, eye contact is something we can do just a little bit more of. It'll make me feel more connected, and I can let you off the hook more on XYZ.
Cool. All right, so this is kind of a stump the counselor, because I like this one. So when you're eating out, do we get more connection sitting next to each other or across from each other? So next to each other's proximity, across from each other we have eye contact. So it's not exactly a trick question, but
this is a fabulous question because we could go in so many different directions with it. All right, because it also speaks to what drives romantic connection, which we haven't talked a lot about. We've been talking about connection in general, but romantic connection is its own specific category. And just feeling emotionally connected doesn't necessarily drive lust and sexual excitement, right? And all the things that we need to drive romantic interest in the long term. So sometimes when people go out to dinner, having a little bit more of a sense of distance, a little bit more of a sense of strangeness, if you will, can stimulate that early courtship feeling of, ooh, this is a person I don't totally know. I'm just getting to know them. And we have a certain sense of distance and tension between us that feels like the old days. So that's something to keep in mind. But yes, there's value in being face to face because we can see each other's eyes. There's also value in the hug that we talked about earlier where we can't see each other's eyes, right? So when do you decide to be physically close and not looking? And the right answer is that a mix is important.
Okay.
Sometimes we need to be stuck together side by side, sitting together because the physical closeness is what we want. Sometimes we need to be able to see each other and watch our faces and our eyes. And it's just an intuitive sense of what you need in that moment.
I got some great advice right before I went out on my first date with my wife. And a guy said, so if you really like this girl, whenever you're getting seated, you let her sit with the back to the wall. Because, the dude always wants to be the gunslinger, right? Sit in the corner where you can see everything. Because it's just the opposite. You want to be only able to see her and give her all your attention.
That's great.
So
advice.
I'm going to vote for across the table. And that worked for me, at least on the first date with the most important lady in my life.
That's great.
But in the movies, we sit side by side.
Right.
There we go. My husband and I work different shifts most of the week. What advice do you have for couples who are on different schedules?
For couples who are on different schedules, and this also applies to military families, couples where one person travels a lot for work and so on, is you have a limited amount of time to connect, so you better make it count. This is also true for couples that have small children and are constantly sleep deprived and tired and get about 30 seconds at the end of the day to connect, which I understand very well because that's what I'm dealing with in my life right now. So I get to practice this a lot. So you have a very small amount of time to connect. You better make it count. How do you make it count? By using all the strategies that we've talked about in the call today. Because if you only have 3 minutes, between your work schedule and your partner's work schedule, how are you using those 3 minutes? Are you having a drive-by conversation in the kitchen while one of you is washing the dishes and one of you is making a snack? Or are you turning toward each other, getting nice and close, being in each other's eyes, and saying the things that mean the most? What does your heart want to say? And a good rule of thumb here is, I know it's a little bit of a serious thought, but is to think about what if this was the last moment you saw your partner? What if you never got to see them again? What would you say? And honestly, for busy couples with busy schedules, that's exactly what you want to say each and every single day. And if you need to, let's say you have teeth brushing time in the morning, that's really all you get because somebody stays at work till midnight. Put the toothbrushes down for a minute, look in each other's eyes, and say something meaningful from your heart. If you only have 30 seconds, honestly, the connection from that lasts an entire day, if not more.
Cool. So it can resonate. If you do the right
Yes.
things, it can resonate for a long time.
Absolutely.
That is cool. I just want to see, I just read this and I'm trying not to multitask because that's what the book's about too. But it's very, this person says that they thought they had a healthy relationship despite some of their fighting, but big aha that this lady had was that they weren't hugging. And she comes from a culture where there's a lot of it. And that's just immediately, sometimes what the one thing is, they're missing that ingredient. So way to go. I love that you got that aha. I totally wanted to ask you this and talking about language and avoiding hot button words.
Yeah.
And someone was kind enough to ask, what are the hot button words? I mean, if they can be said in a PG, 13 environment.
Yeah, they can. Dangerous words and phrases are specific to each and every one of us. So, there are some general guidelines on that, but you need to know your partner because certain words are going to trigger them. They might not trigger somebody else. But invoking somebody's mother could be a hot button trigger, right? Another example of a dangerous word or phrase is you always, right? You always X is typically registers in the nervous system as a stressful escalation of the conversation, right? Is there a more nuanced way to say that? I often feel this way versus, you always do X, which is going to escalate. So words like never, words like always, words like, your mother, these are the things that we have to be careful with because they're often not true. They're generalities. They just create tension in the conversation.
Right. A lot of times when we say you, I've been taught this, you're projecting something on someone that may or may not be true, but how you feel about the way you perceive things is almost always a safer way to go about it.
Yes. And in communication theory, most of us have been taught to get away from you statements and go more to I statements. And that's absolutely true. If you can talk about yourself and your own feelings, you're in safer territory than if you say you anything. But the next level there when it comes to relationship science, and this is what I really like to teach, is the we statement is the most powerful of all. It's more powerful than I statements. If you can get to a point in conversation with your partner where you're able to say, are we having the conversation we want to have right now? Are we good at this? Are we bad at that? How can we get better at something together? That's a collective way of expressing feelings that spreads out the blame and it spreads out the responsibility. And it's a very powerful way to communicate.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot here because I'm going to have to roll us out to the finish really quickly. But one more, there's a lot of people on this call, and I knew this from that are actually working together in the same office all day long. Could you give them 30 seconds of advice how to maybe apply this when you're actually together all the time?
Yes.
Well, and maybe proximity is a problem in that case. I don't know.
And I know a lot about this because my wife and I actually work in the same floor of the same building. We have similar practices, and then we're around each other, of course, with our small kids and so on. So we see each other a lot. Here's what's important to know is that we all wear different hats in relationship. And sometimes we have the romantic hat on. Sometimes we have the business hat on. We have the household CEO hat. We have the parent hat. You have to be aware of all the different roles that you have to fill as a partner in someone's life. And when you work together, it's very important to clearly delineate work time from personal time and to also delineate work space from personal space, meaning when it's not work time, it has to very clearly be personal time. And you can't be on your phone, you can't be on your computer, you can't be texting people back about work. You have to really shift. And you and your partner have to look at each other and go, okay, we're off. And now we're going to put on different hats and we're going to be in a different role with each other. We're going to be sexy partners for each other. We're going to be best friends and go out and have a great time. We're not going to work. And so being aware
of that transition time you were talking about, you got to pivot together and know that you've both pivoted.
And then you have to keep true to that, because when people slip, it starts to really hurt the personal relationship.
I love it. That's great advice. All right, so I've got up on your screen, we have 5 mistakes to avoid. So thank you for providing a quick read. So go to readysetlove.com/the one thing rather, and download that. I've actually taken a look at it. It's really great stuff to reinforce what we were talking about today. Folks, if you want to, at the end of this, you'll get a link. We would love for you to fill out the survey. We get great feedback every month on how to make this better. This recording will be done within 24 hours. You'll get a link to it, and pretty soon we'll have it up on our website so that you can link to it and watch this. Maybe you'll get your spouse or your partner to come back and watch it with you, which is probably a great first step. Our next webinar is on September 30th. Super excited about that. I hope you'll put it on your calendar. And finally, and before I thank our guest and thank you for joining us on a busy day, if you want to check us out, obviously you can find the one thing at our website. You can find me online. We've got John's Ready, Set, Love 2 up there on Twitter, but it's actually better to look for Ready, Set, Love on Facebook. If you didn't get your question answered, is it okay if they go find you on Facebook?
Absolutely.
Great. And so you can get any unanswered questions answered on his Facebook page. And I think that's it. John, thank you so much for sharing today.
It's been a real honor and a privilege to be here with you, Jay. I'm so excited that we got a chance to talk about this topic. And I just want to reiterate, for those of you that are really serious about strengthening your relationship and having, like Jay said earlier, not just a good relationship, but an awesome relationship that impacts your kids and everybody around you, please go to my website, readysetlove.com, sign up for the Ready, Set, Love program. You'll be surprised how much you and your partner can learn. It's something you can do together from home on your computer or on your smartphone. It's quick, it's easy, it's affordable, and you will get so much better at these relationship skills that we've been talking about.
I mean, I told you, we're going to do it, and it is super cheap. Because I looked at a lot of these online courses, and they're like thousands of dollars. This is like, a couple $100. I can't even remember. But to get good, consistent exercise at home, we're on it. We're done. We're going to do it. So thank you for sharing that and providing it. I know you spent a long time preparing it. Everybody who's on gave us an hour of their time today. Thank you for joining us. Hope we'll see you next month. And please share this with your friends so that they can join us on these webinars and hopefully get better at their one thing.